Please be seated. There is a Buddhist teaching that generosity comes in three forms: material goods, wisdom, and fearlessness. That's right. You can give someone fearlessness. Zen teacher Norman Fisher writes, "It seems like an impossible gift to give, but it can be given. You give it by giving love. Because when you feel loved, you feel confident. To give the gift of fearlessness is to give others the sense that they matter. They are respected, cared for, secure with a loving reality, and therefore ultimately protected." As I read the stories of Isaiah and the story of Simon Peter, I was struck by the generosity of fearlessness that God and Jesus extend. Both Isaiah and Peter respond to their call with fear and unworthiness. "Woe is me, I am lost, I am a man of unclean lips. Go away from me, Lord, for I am a sinful man." Their instinct is self-doubt and self-protection, fearing for their own belonging and belovedness. And we know this fear well. But what stands out is God's and Jesus' response. They don't turn away or demand that Isaiah and Peter prove themselves first. Instead, they insist on relationship. God purifies Isaiah's lips. Jesus tells Peter, "Do not be afraid." The call is given not after they become worthy, but as they are. So this time, when I was reading these stories, I found myself identifying a little less with Isaiah or Peter, and more I was really wondering, what does it mean to be like Jesus here? What does it look like to stand in the face of someone else's fear and offer them fearlessness? Can I, like Jesus, be generous enough to provide a space where others feel loved, respected, cared for, and secure? All of us are susceptible to fear, especially fear of the other. It's one of the oldest human instincts. Fear tells us to protect ourselves, to create barriers, to close in. But the invitation to be fearless and to give fearlessness is an invitation to live with grace, courage, and hope. Doing what is loving casts out fear from our lives and allows us to be open to the person in front of us with an open heart, practicing the hospitality of Jesus. This kind of fearlessness, open-hearted hospitality, it isn't just something that happens in Scripture. It happens in real life too. When my brother was considering confirmation, he took the process seriously. Just because his older sisters had gone through it did not mean he was going to follow suit. And after deep discernment, he decided it wasn't for him. So one Sunday morning, he went to tell the clergy of the church where we grew up. And he said, "I've given it a lot of thought, I want to let you know that at this time, I need to consider myself an atheist. And the response? Well, that's fine. Will you still be here to acolyte for the 10 o'clock service? There was no panic, no rejection, no fear for his eternal soul. Just an invitation to keep showing up. And one of those priests even officiated his wedding a decade later. Their generosity of fearlessness allowed my brother to be honest about where he was in his faith journey and still belong in the community. They didn't let fear of difference or of doubt get in the way of love. That's the kind of discipleship Jesus calls us to meet people where they are without fear, and to say, you belong here. You are beloved. Methodist pastor Adam Hamilton writes, the failure to get to know our neighbors and the shirking of our responsibility to love them means that we will continue to live with fear. But love perfected by actions has the power to drive out fear. If we don't love, we will fear. But if we move toward one another in love, we begin to undo fear's power. And I have experienced this gift of fearlessness myself. You'll likely hear me tell this story many times in different ways. But the bravest that I have ever been, more than any crisis or challenge, was the first day of middle school. I knew no one. And when lunchtime came, I had to face that terrifying question, where do I sit? My stomach knotted, I was sweating, I was shaking. I said a prayer, gathered all my courage, took a deep breath, and asked my locker neighbor, Beth, can I sit with you? And she smiled. She said, sure, I'm sitting with some friends, you can join us. Beth may not have known it, but in that moment, she gave me fearlessness. I felt seen, respected, like I belonged somewhere. Years later, one of the most significant times when I had the opportunity to give fearlessness to, a dear friend and I were sitting at a coffee shop in college, chatting, studying. At some point, she took a deep breath and turned her laptop screen toward me. And on a blank document, she had written one sentence. I want to tell you I'm gay. Her hands were shaking visibly. She looked for my reaction, and I just smiled and said, okay, that's great. She cleared the screen, turning it back towards her, and hands still shivering. She typed, that doesn't bother you or change things between us? Probably chuckled a little bit. I replied, no. I'm glad for you. It doesn't change anything. And she exhaled. Her breathing finally steadied. Her shoulders dropped, and you could see a smile of relief. Like Isaiah and Peter, she entered that moment with fear. And all I had to do was show her she was safe. She mattered. She belonged. Moments like these are moments of fearlessness. Open-hearted hospitality that Jesus models. The generosity of Christ's incarnation is not just that he came, but that he stays with us in our struggles and our fears, every moment calling us beloved. When we are secure in that belovedness, we are capable of giving fearlessness to others. Jesuit priest Gregory Boyle, he's the founder of Homeboy Industries, a gang rehabilitation organization. He writes, "The soul of Jesus is always telling us, don't waste your heart on fear." What made Jesus dangerous, in a sense, was his lack of fear. That was his strength. Jesus could touch the undying center of his soul, and he simply wasn't afraid. Former gang members as well. They find a community of cherished belonging, and it forges something that death can't touch. When we live without fear, when we refuse to let it control our relationships or dictate who we care for, we step into the dangerous and beautiful strength of Christ. We build communities of belonging that death and division cannot touch. And I feel so fortunate. This is what my parents have always modeled for me. I mean, they literally named me Amy, which means beloved. And I have never doubted my belovedness before God. And because of that, I had the courage to ask Beth to sit with her. Because even if she said no, I was still beloved. I had the courage to answer my call to ministry, even if it turned out to be as terrifying as middle school. I am still beloved. Through my own fearlessness, I hope to share God's generosity and the gift of fearlessness to those around me. So anyone I meet can feel like they belong. In one another's presence, we express God's belovedness, and we witness Christ's illumination in our mutual belonging. God's generosity, Jesus' generosity, the grace poured into our human life invites us to claim our belovedness and live without fear. And when we live fearlessly, others can do the same. The phrase, "do not be afraid," appears around 350 times in the Bible. Imagine telling yourself that every day for the rest of this year. Do not be afraid, I am beloved. It can feel like a lot to be asked to be fearless, but that is the generosity of discipleship. That others might come to know that they are also beloved children of God. So let's take a moment in prayer together. As you're comfortable, I invite you to maybe close your eyes or soften your gaze and just let your hands and feet rest. And as you breathe in, bring your awareness to what it feels like when you know your belovedness and your security with God. You are never alone. You are always loved. Can you dwell in that security? And what does your body feel like when it feels secure? It's good to notice this, so when feelings of insecurity or fear arise, we sense the change in our bodies, and we recognize the need to return to belovedness. What does belovedness feel like? And with another deep breath, we can return to our space together. I find this to be a helpful practice. Every day, to sit in stillness and attune to my belovedness. And it will strengthen your fearlessness so that maybe you can be as generous as Jesus was. And so now let's put this practice into action. You're going to turn to somebody around near you and say, do not be afraid, you are beloved. Maybe turn to a couple people. Do not be afraid, you are beloved. Now, makes you think that my middle school lunchroom example was trivial. Let me leave you with this quote from Dr. King. He gave a speech in 1967 to a group of junior high students. Number one in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity, your worth, and your somebodyness. Don't allow anybody to make you feel like you're a nobody. Always feel that you count. Always feel that you have worth. And always feel that your life has ultimate significance. No matter your age, I hope you find security in that. Do not be afraid. You are beloved. You belong to Jesus, and you belong